Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to my channel. Let me ask you something. Have you ever found yourself thinking about her long after she left the room? That lingering scent, the way she laughed at your joke, the text you almost sent but didn't. Now flip it. What if you were the one she couldn't stop thinking about? What if in your silence your presence became louder? In your calm confidence, she started replaying every moment, wondering what you're doing, who you're becoming, and why she suddenly misses you when you haven't even said a word. You see, high-value men don't beg for attention. They don't flood inboxes with good morning texts or try to prove their worth through desperate affection. No, they communicate differently. Their energy speaks before their words do. Their absence doesn't create distance, it creates desire. In this video, we're going to explore how high-value men communicate in a way that makes a woman miss them, not out of manipulation, but from a deep, almost magnetic emotional imprint. This isn't about playing games, it's about understanding your masculine power, emotional depth, and the quiet strength of intentional presence. So lean in, take a breath. Because the way you connect, speak, and even not speak can change everything. Have you ever been in a moment where she's standing right there, looking at you, but it feels like you've already left the room? Not physically, but something in your presence, your eyes, your energy has become still, detached, almost mysterious. That moment, that invisible shift, is where the communication of a high-value man begins. You don't have to raise your voice. You don't need clever one-liners or tricks borrowed from some dating guide. No, what you need is intention. You see, most men talk to be heard, but high-value men, they communicate to be felt. And what does that really mean? It means that your silence has weight, your eye contact has truth. Your words don't just fill the air, they land, they stay. Like the echo of a song that plays long after the music stops. Women don't miss men who were always available, always explaining themselves, always needing to be understood. They miss the ones who left a part of their essence behind, the ones whose words were like pages torn from a journal, personal, rare, unfinished. Let me tell you something important. In our hyper-connected world where everyone is just a click away, emotional distance has become a kind of scarcity. And scarcity, as you know, creates value. If you're always reacting, always texting, always showing up in her notifications, you're not leaving space for her to feel your absence. You're not giving her a chance to long for you. Now don't misunderstand me. This isn't about ghosting or pulling away as punishment. That's not maturity. That's insecurity in disguise. I'm talking about something far deeper, a kind of emotional discipline that says, I don't need to prove myself to you every day in order to be real. That's where the first shift happens. The shift from approval seeking to self-rooting. When you stop needing to be constantly acknowledged, you become more grounded in your own value. You stop chasing clarity and instead become the kind of man who radiates clarity without having to explain it. And here's the irony, that's what makes her miss you. Not because you disappear, but because when you're not there, the quality of your presence is still felt. Let's talk about emotional brevity. High-value men don't overshare. They don't use 20 words when 5 will do. They're not vague, but they're not performative either. They understand that true intimacy doesn't come from saying everything. It comes from saying the right things and leaving room for curiosity. Imagine this, you're on a date, and she's asking questions. Instead of answering with a rehearsed story or trying to impress her with details of your success, you pause, you look her in the eye, and you answer honestly, but not completely. You share something real, something meaningful, but you leave the edges undefined. That undefined space, it creates a sense of mystery, not confusion. Mystery. And mystery is not about hiding, it's about pacing. It's about knowing that unfolding yourself slowly is more seductive than laying yourself bare in the first 5 minutes. This is how emotional communication becomes an art. The way you listen, the way you lean in, not just with your body, but with your attention. The way you make her feel like she's the only woman in the world, not because you say it, but because in that moment your world is her. When you speak with presence. Not to impress, not to convince, just to be known. And when you're not speaking, you're not checking your phone or scanning the room. You're still speaking through your focus, your breath, your stillness. There's something incredibly attractive about a man who doesn't need to speak to make an impact. You become the man she replays in her head. The way you looked at her when she wasn't expecting it. The words you didn't say that still somehow meant everything. The conversation that didn't have an ending. That's how you start to live rent-free in her mind, not by crowding her thoughts, but by opening a space that only you seem to fill. And here's another truth that men often overlook. Women miss the emotional experience you create far more than they miss your physical presence. If you want to be unforgettable, you don't need six-pack abs or an exotic car. You need emotional precision. You need to know how to communicate a sense of certainty without being rigid, a sense of openness without being needy. That delicate balance is everything. When you ask her a question, are you listening for her answer, or are you just waiting for your turn to speak? She can feel that, Women have an exquisite sensitivity to emotional nuance. She may not always articulate it, but she feels it in her body. When your words don't match your energy, she loses trust. When your attention wanders, she closes off. And when you push too hard to be seen, she stops looking. But when you're rooted in your own internal world, when you are more curious than performative, more open than eager, that's when she starts to lean in. That's when your silence becomes a question mark she wants to answer. That's when she finds herself thinking, what is he thinking about right now? Even when you haven't said a word in hours. You want her to miss you. Be present, deeply present when you are with her, and unapologetically present in your own life when you're not. That contrast is what creates longing. You see, when you fill every gap with noise, with attention, with validation-seeking behaviors, you remove the possibility of mystery. You suffocate the space where desire lives. But when you trust that your presence is enough, when you stop rushing in to reassure, to fix, to chase, you let her feel your absence in a way that draws her back in. So let's bring this down to earth. Think about the next time you feel the urge to reach out just to be seen, the impulse to send a hey text just to know you still exist in her mind. I want you to pause. I want you to ask yourself, is this coming from power or from panic? Because if it's panic, if it's fear of being forgotten, you are outsourcing your self-worth to her attention. But if it's power, if it's from a place of grounded clarity, you can wait, you can give her space. And in that space, she begins to wonder, she begins to feel. You're no longer trying to be unforgettable by being ever present. You're unforgettable because your presence had depth. And this is the beginning of it all. There is something undeniably powerful about a man who is comfortable in the quiet. Not the silence that comes from withdrawal, but the kind that is alive with awareness. It's the silence of a man who does not need to dominate the space, but whose presence still anchors the room. When you speak from this place, everything shifts. You don't say, I miss you, to get her attention. You live a life that makes her feel your absence. That's the difference. One seeks reassurance, the other builds attraction. Let's talk about restraint. A high-value man knows when to lean in and when to hold back. He understands that longing is not born from proximity, but from possibility, from wondering, from the unspoken. What if that floats between two people and colors everything they say and don't say? When you're too available, too explanatory, too eager, you strip the relationship of tension. And tension in the right dose is electric. It's what makes her text you just to feel that charge again. It's what makes her read your last message because it left her thinking, not because it was clever, but because it was true. You see, a woman doesn't crave just a man who responds quickly. She craves a man who lives deeply, who is busy building a life so rich, so meaningful, that she wants to be part of it, not because he asks her to, but because he doesn't need her to. That's how emotional gravity works. It's not about pulling someone in. It's about being so centered that they naturally orbit you. And that brings us to the way you speak about your purpose. Purpose to a high-value man is not just a career or a goal. It's a way of being. When you talk about what matters to you, it's not for applause. It's not for validation. It's because your soul needs to express it. That's what draws her in. When you talk about what you're creating, not complaining. When you speak about your direction, not your distractions. When your words aren't about who you used to be or who hurt you, but about who you are becoming. That language, that forward-moving energy, that's what women miss. Because it isn't static, it doesn't cling, it invites. Now, let's touch the delicate art of detachment. Emotional detachment isn't coldness. It's not a defense. It's the ability to love without control, to give presence without performance, to allow someone in without making them your anchor. So many men confuse love with possession. But the truth is, a woman doesn't miss the man who tried to own her. She misses the man who saw her, who mirrored back her complexity, who allowed her to come closer without ever chasing her. And that's the next layer of high-value communication. It's how you reflect her. When she shares something personal with you, do you reflect it with curiosity or judgment? Do you listen to understand or to correct? Do you give her room to unfold, or do you jump in too quickly with solutions? A woman misses the man who saw her fully, not because he agreed with everything she said, but because he understood what she meant, even when her words weren't perfect. That's the kind of presence that lingers. That's the kind of presence that stays with her when she's alone and remembering who made her feel safest. You want to leave an imprint, make her feel understood in a way no one else ever has. And here's a secret: most men never learn. Your ability to hold space for a woman's emotions without needing to fix them is one of the most attractive things you can offer. She may not always remember every word you said, but she will never forget how she felt in your presence when she was unraveling. So what does that look like in action? It looks like not flinching when she gets emotional. It looks like letting her have her moment without minimizing it, interrupting it, or using it as a stage for your own frustration. It's patience, it's presence. It's holding a kind of calm that says, You don't have to hide that here. When you can do that, she doesn't just miss you when you're gone. She yearns for the safety you created. And once a woman associates you with emotional safety, that is a memory she carries like a compass. It brings her back to you over and over again. Now let's go deeper. You may be wondering, but what if I'm not naturally good with words? What if I don't know how to say all of this eloquently? Let me be clear, this isn't about being poetic. It's about being honest. The words don't need to be perfect. They need to be real. They need to come from a place of truth, not technique. When you say, I hear you, say it like you mean it. When you say, that must have been hard for you, don't say it like you read it in a book. Say it like you've lived something, too. Let her feel that your empathy isn't intellectual, it's emotional. Because high-value communication isn't about volume, it's about resonance. Even a simple, tell me more, can make her open up in ways she didn't expect, if it's said with presence, not performance. And here's something rarely said but always true, the more grounded you are in your own emotions, the more available you become for hers. If you've numbed yourself to your own pain, your own joy, your own history, then your words will come out hollow. You can't fake depth. You can't fake stillness. You can't fake emotional maturity. She will feel the dissonance and it will create distance. But when you've done the work, when you've sat with your own wounds without trying to bury them or bleed them on others, when you've taken time to become emotionally integrated, that's when your communication changes. That's when you can say things that linger, not because they're clever, but because they are anchored in experience. So take this moment right now and ask yourself, am I communicating to connect or am I communicating to control? Because connection doesn't cling, it doesn't demand, it doesn't rush. Connection is about energy alignment. It's about two people feeling seen without losing themselves. And that starts with you, with how you speak, how you listen, and how you lead with emotional truth rather than emotional need. You don't make a woman miss you by withdrawing and hoping she notices. You make her miss you by showing up so fully in the moments you share that the memory of you becomes a rhythm in her heartbeat. That's real intimacy. And that's what a high-value man cultivates, not through performance, but through presence. And presence, my friend, doesn't require perfection. It requires truth. We often think that being missed is about what we did, what we said, how often we texted, how carefully we crafted our presence. But no, what makes a woman miss you isn't just what you did for her. It's how you made her feel about herself when she was with you. That's the part that clings to her skin like perfume. That's the part she rewinds in her mind at 2 a.m. when the world is quiet and she's scrolling through her thoughts. A high-value man communicates in a way that elevates her. He doesn't try to dominate the conversation. He invites her into something deeper. He creates a shared space of respect, curiosity, and subtle admiration, not through compliments alone, but through reflection. It's the way he notices something she didn't even know was worth noticing. How her eyes narrow when she's focused, the soft shift in her tone when she talks about something that matters. He points these things out not to flatter, but to witness her. And in being seen like that, she feels more herself than she's felt in a long time. That's when you become unforgettable. Because while most men are chasing validation, the high-value man is offering resonance. He's mirroring her back to herself, not as an object of desire, but as someone already full of value. And ironically, that's when he becomes the one she desires more deeply. But here's the thing, this level of connection requires emotional presence. And emotional presence doesn't come from rehearsed scripts. It comes from inner stillness, a kind of emotional slowness. You're not rushing to fill the silence. You're not rushing to be liked. You're not rushing at all. You're simply there, not distracted, not anxious, not needing anything. And she feels it, because your stillness allows her to settle. We're not taught this as men. We're taught to perform, to pursue, to impress. And in doing so, we forget that receptivity is also powerful. Listening isn't weak. Slowing down isn't passive. In fact, it's one of the most magnetic things you can do. You want to communicate like a high-value man, then master the art of pausing. Before you respond, pause. Before you react, pause. Before you reach out impulsively, pause. That pause is where your power lives. Because in that moment, you are no longer controlled by emotion. You are holding it. You are choosing your response. You are saying to yourself, I don't need to chase this. I can feel what I feel and still choose how I show up. That is where emotional mastery begins. And women feel that deeply. It makes them feel safe. Not in the way that's boring, but in the way that's stabilizing. In the way that allows them to relax, to open, to trust. Because high-value communication is not about dazzling someone. It's about making them feel like they can drop their mask with you, like they don't have to perform either. And from that space, real intimacy is born. So let's get honest. What happens when she pulls away? Most men panic. They overtext. They get reactive. They start explaining themselves, apologizing for being too much or not enough, begging for another chance to be seen. And in that moment, they give away all of their emotional authority, not because they're bad people, but because they've never learned to self-soothe. But the high-value man, he breathes. He doesn't chase her energy, he returns to his. He doesn't reach out just to prove he still matters. He doesn't need her confirmation to validate his worth. He understands that people pull away for their own reasons. And if there is truth between them, it will hold. And if not, then it wasn't truth. It was attachment. This is where communication becomes spiritual, because it's no longer about what you say. It's about the frequency you emit. When you are calm in your truth, grounded in your self-worth, unattached to outcome, but still open to connection, you speak a language that doesn't need translation. She doesn't just hear your words, she feels your essence. And that's what she misses when you're not around. Not the clever text, not the expensive date, but the feeling of being in your field, the calmness, the strength, the clarity, the way your presence made her feel more at home in her own skin. Now, this doesn't mean you don't express affection. It doesn't mean you withhold love. No, you give freely, but never as a transaction, never as a strategy. You give because it's who you are. And when it's not reciprocated, you don't crumble. You don't collapse. You honor your own heart by keeping it open, but never desperate. Because desperation repels, clarity attracts, and a man who is emotionally clear, who can express his desires without neediness, his affection without expectation, his passion without pressure, that man becomes a kind of gravitational force. She misses him even when he's in the same room. Because she knows he's not giving himself away to be loved. He's already in love with his life, with his path, with who he's becoming, and that is what draws her in. That's what makes her want to be part of his world. So the next time you find yourself wondering, why isn't she reaching out? Why isn't she chasing me back? I want you to flip the question. Ask yourself, am I even rooted in a life that invites someone in? Are you so aligned with your mission, your passions, your peace, that even your absence feels meaningful? Because when you live like that, when your time is valuable, your boundaries are clear, your communication is honest but emotionally contained, you become rare. And in a world drowning in overexposure, rarity is what people crave. She doesn't need more texts. She needs more moments that make her heart ache a little when you're not there. More you in your fullness, less you in your proving. And that, my friend, is the pivot. The turning point, when you no longer speak to be wanted, but to express your truth, when you no longer react to her silence, but create a world so magnetic that she feels it even from miles away. Because the man who truly knows himself, who can express his heart without fear and hold his boundaries with love, that man doesn't need to be loud to be heard. He just is. And she will miss that. More than you know. There's a moment, usually quiet and unspoken, when a woman begins to feel the absence of something she didn't even realize she depended on. It's subtle. Like reaching for a familiar blanket and finding it's no longer there. She doesn't always say it aloud, but in the depth of her being, she begins to miss how safe it felt to be seen without having to perform. She starts missing you, not because you vanished, but because your presence had substance. That is the kind of man women come back for. Not the loudest, not the neediest, not even the most romantic, but the one who understood that communication is not about conquering space, it's about inviting resonance. A high-value man doesn't confuse noise for intimacy. He speaks fewer words, but they land deeper, and sometimes his most powerful communication isn't verbal at all. It's the way he exits a room, confident, unrushed, unbothered. It's the way he declines an invitation, with kindness, not excuse. It's the way he pauses before responding, not to calculate, but because he respects the space between stimulus and reply. In those spaces, he isn't waiting to win anyone over. He's holding his center. And because he doesn't demand attention, he draws it. Women don't miss the man who tries to impress them. They miss the one who gave them the grace to unfold and then step back to let the unfolding happen. You don't build that kind of communication from watching others. You build it by feeling your own emotions deeply and learning to sit with them without outsourcing the discomfort. The more at home you are in your emotional world, the less you'll feel the need to fill every void in hers. This is where true masculine presence is born, not from bravado, but from stillness. From not flinching when things become intimate, from not pulling away when vulnerability enters the room, from allowing her emotions to be loud without making it about your silence. Most men avoid intensity because they fear it will unmask their inadequacy. But a high-value man, he doesn't run from emotional depth. He meets it with breadth, with curiosity, with restraint, not the kind that suppresses, but the kind that holds. This is a very different kind of strength. When a woman shares her fears, her triggers, her dreams, he doesn't hijack the conversation by comparing it to his own life. He holds it gently, with emotional hands that don't grip, but don't drop either. That kind of presence is unforgettable, not because it demands gratitude, but because it creates relief. And in a world that's constantly rushing her, a man who slows down and feels with her is a man she will miss in ways she cannot explain. So what does it look like to live this every day? It looks like choosing depth over distraction. When you're tempted to numb yourself with endless scrolling or shallow interactions, you instead sit with your thoughts. You ask yourself, what am I avoiding? And what emotion wants to be felt right now? Because when you can process your inner life without projecting it, you become safe. not just for her but for yourself. That inner safety is what she feels when she's with you, and it's what she aches for when you're gone. And let's not forget sensuality. This too is a form of communication, one that transcends language. A high-value man knows that the way he touches, the way he breathes next to her skin, the pace of his hands, all of it communicates. Not dominance, not neediness, but presence. He isn't trying to impress her with technique. He's reading her, responding, creating a space where her body doesn't have to defend itself. And that kind of intimacy, it rewires her. She doesn't just miss the sex. She misses how alive she felt in his arms, how quiet her mind became in his stillness, how seen she felt when he kissed her not to consume, but to honor. Even his absence becomes intimate, because it was never about the physical body. It was about the emotional container he offered her, a place where she could let go without falling. Now, imagine living from this place not just in your romantic life but in all your relationships. At work, with friends, with strangers, speaking slowly, with intention, listening without interrupting, holding eye contact just a few seconds longer than what's comfortable, not to intimidate but to connect. You become a man whose words carry weight, whose silence speaks volumes, who doesn't need to repeat himself because the first time was enough. That kind of man doesn't just enter a room, he alters it. He doesn't leave a trail of broken expectations behind him. He leaves a sense of clarity, of calm, of earned respect. And that too is a language, one of boundaries, of knowing when to step forward and when to walk away, because walking away when necessary is also communication. When a woman plays with your time, your clarity, or your peace, you don't need to argue. You don't need to explain your value. You simply withdraw with dignity, not to punish, but to protect your energy. And that boundary, spoken or not, is sometimes the loudest message you can send. So let's pause for a breath. If you want to be missed, don't just be attractive, be anchored. Let her associate you with steadiness, not volatility, with truth, not confusion, with emotional clarity, not chaos. That's what makes you irreplaceable, not to everyone, but to the ones who are ready for a man of your emotional caliber. And if she's not ready, that's not a reflection of your worth. That's simply timing. A high-value man doesn't shrink to be loved sooner. He expands into his wholeness, knowing that the right woman will recognize him by how safe she feels in his stillness. And maybe she won't say it out loud. Maybe she won't even understand it fully. But in her quietest moments, in the stillness of her own heart, she will feel your absence, like a vibration, like a missing chord in a favorite song, not because you vanished, but because when you were there, you were fully there. There's something that lingers long after a high-value man walks away, not just the sound of his voice or the look in his eyes, but the emotional residue of his presence. It's not something you can bottle or fake. It's not charisma, though it may feel like it. It's not charm, though it may carry a kind of sweetness. No, it's something more sacred. It's the unmistakable imprint of emotional integrity. Because the truth is, we don't remember every conversation. We don't replay every word. But we always remember the way someone made us feel about ourselves in their presence. And if your presence made her feel accepted, if it mirrored back her depth without judgment, if it gave her silence without abandonment, if it spoke truth without violence, then you've done something most men never even realize is possible. You've become a memory that comforts and awakens, a connection that haunts in the most tender way. And yes, she will miss you, not because you pulled away to manipulate her longing, not because you disappeared to teach her a lesson, but because you showed up in such rare emotional clarity that your absence reveals her own hunger for depth. You didn't chase, you invited, you didn't perform, you revealed, you didn't disappear, you allowed space to breathe. That's how high-value men communicate, through energy, through nuance, through the conscious holding of space rather than the desperate pursuit of closeness. You loved, but you didn't cling. You spoke, but you didn't preach. You were open, but not emptied out. And that is unforgettable. You see, most people are itching for connection, but terrified of what it might require. Honesty, vulnerability, accountability. But you're different. You've chosen the harder path, the deeper path. You've chosen to feel, to risk being misunderstood rather than armor up with charm and humor. You've chosen to become a man who isn't measured by how many people respond to his texts, but by how many lives are quietly shifted by his presence. So what now? You live, you lead with presence. You speak with precision, you feel with courage, and in every conversation, every interaction, romantic or otherwise, you ask yourself, am I performing to be wanted? Or am I resting in my worth? You don't need her to chase you. Because when you speak from truth, when you stand in your life with dignity and openness, she feels you, even from across the room, across the city, across the silence. And it's in that silence, when you're not pushing, not posting, not chasing, that she begins to notice what's missing, not noise you. And if she doesn't, if your presence is not met with recognition, then bless her journey, let her go. A high-value man never demands understanding from someone who hasn't yet developed the depth to meet him. You walk away with your softness intact, with your heart still open, because you're not leaving from bitterness, you're leaving from clarity. And clarity is what she'll remember most, not the big gestures, Not the clever lines, but the peace in your eyes, the way your silence never punished her, the way your presence never needed proof. You showed her what it means to be emotionally seen by a man who wasn't trying to possess her, a man who had already claimed himself. That's what makes her miss you. That's what echoes in the rooms she walks into. That's what she'll search for in every voice that follows yours. And so, if you take one thing from this, let it be this: to be missed, you must be felt. To be felt, you must be real. And to be real, you must have the courage to live fully in your own truth, whether she chooses you or not. Let your life become the most powerful form of communication you'll ever offer. Because the man who's in love with his path, who speaks from his soul, who listens with reverence and holds space with presence, is never truly gone. He becomes a heartbeat. He becomes a memory that stays long after the story ends. And somewhere out there, she'll feel it. She'll feel you.